back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as always, by my two colleagues, Josh Sullivan.
Hello.
Welcome to you, Josh.
Thank you.
And Matt Van Milligan.
Hello.
Welcome back, Matt.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to be with you guys. Listen, last week we were talking about the Orthodox churches, right? So
The split of
1054. And then, so sort of as a follow-up to that, we're going to talk today about other churches who have split from the Catholic Church, but there have been signs of reconciliation.
Yeah.
One in particular, we're just going to get right to it today, is the Anglican Church. Now, the Anglican Church obviously has history, and just in the last 15 years, the Catholic Church kind of sent an olive branch in a formal way. There's always been attempts at reconciliation. Yeah. There's always been, people coming from the Anglican Church to the Catholic Church, whatever. But the Catholic Church extended an avenue for reconciliation in a formal way. And so since then, we've seen Anglicans come to the Catholic Church to be in communion with the Catholic Church. Individuals, families, clergy, and sometimes entire parishes of Anglicans have become Catholic. So we're going to talk about today how that happened, why it happened, how it can happen, and if this sort of set the tone for further reconciliation with other Protestant denominations. Okay?
Yeah. If we talk about, from my history of the Anglican Church, basically King Henry VIII, that's kind of where this starts, right? King Henry VIII wants to get married, divorced and married for a third time, or was it the fourth time? Third time, I think it was. Third time, and the Pope says no. And so King Henry VIII says, okay, you're no longer in charge of the church. I'm in charge of the church. I'm in charge of the Church of England. And basically, I think from my understanding, says something along the lines of, all Catholics get out. This is now, we're it wasn't Anglican at the time, but Anglican Church rules England now, and I'm the head of the Anglican Church. Is that?
Yes, to varying degrees, and a lot of Catholic clergy at the time were brought into Church of England, and were just now you're Anglican priests. Some left, some still operated underground. That even at points where there was a lot of persecution, direct persecution against the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has always retained some identity in England, but that. More or less. Yeah.
And that's where it goes back and forth. As Mary of the Scots and Queen Victoria.
Queen of Scots,
yeah. So that's like, I know that's where a lot of the history goes back and forth with the Protestants fighting the Catholics and back and forth. And specifically at that time, England is...
So similarly to our discussion about Orthodoxy, there was kind of a definitive break at a certain point. And I think at the end of our Orthodoxy episode, we left off on kind of a hopeful note. It's okay, even though there's this kind of history and bad blood and centuries of separation, that with the Orthodox, we're okay, we left it on. Okay, what would it look like for the Orthodox to be brought back into kind of full communion with the Roman Church? And it's cool with the personal ordinariate of St. Peter. It's kind of colloquially called the Anglican ordinariate, but that's not the kind of official term. We have a template of what this actually looks like. So, Father, you were saying that Pope Benedict, it's apostolic exhortation? Constitution. Yeah. In 2009, just kind of paving the way, just kind of in terms of governance, or what would this look like? What's the process? And then I think the first parish was brought over around 2010, 2011. It's a really great process where whichever parish or whichever group wants to be brought into communion with Rome, they apply effectively, and then they are overseen by Rome directly, and they go through a process of kind of initially it was they go line by line through their liturgy, because it's not just now here they give you the Roman Missal and this is what you're doing now. It's an attempt to reconcile a lot of rich tradition in Anglicanism that has developed since, all their patrimony, their liturgical heritage, those kinds of things. You can retain the things that are good and true and beautiful there, but it needs to be reconciled to to the catechism, to the missal itself. So they went through line by line of their liturgy, like, this is good, this is too Protestant, this is whatever, and like, this is what needs to be changed, this is what needs to be reconciled, and why. So then they have a, like, okay, you can continue to celebrate in the form that you have, that's an established custom within your parish, but it is, again, brought into communion. It's unified with the Roman liturgy, but then the parish itself goes through a process, like much like our CIA that we go through with individuals, and you say, okay, you hit your major points. You talk about papal authority. You talk about the seven sacraments. These are what you talk about, the Eucharist itself, and like the theology around the Eucharist, and like for individual candidates, it's like, okay, you can assent to these things individually. For the ordinariate, it really is bringing the entire community into an understanding, allowing them to make informed consent as a body to be brought into communion with the church.
So the whole church goes through the process then, and like a whole congregation.
Yeah. So I think it needs to be a critical mass, where this has happened, where I've seen this happen.
Yeah.
Some people are on board with it. And again, you would expect that the critical mass is on board with it in order for it to go through. Yeah. But some people, it's a bridge too far, or they end up.
So just to clarify, so last week we were talking about the different rites of the Catholic Church. So we have sort of like the Coptic Catholic Church, the Chaldean, the Syro-Malabar rite, like Ukrainian, the Byzantine, So these are rites of the Catholic Church that still fall under the Holy Father, the Pope, the authority of the Pope, the authority of the Catholic Church, right? So what Pope Benedict did in 2009 was, and he begins the Constitution by basically saying, like, because there's been an increase in a number of Anglicans who are seeking full communion with the Catholic Church, we're going to be, sort of proactive about this and extend this olive branch to other Anglicans who are searching to become part of the Catholic faith and maintain their rituals. So, like, for example, to make it sort of clear, if you've ever been to a Byzantine mass, it's still the Catholic Church. Catholics can attend it, but you'll see, the priest sort of celebrates mass. There's little different gestures. There's different prayers.
They sing most of everything.
Some is chanted.
Yeah.
I know a number of months ago, like the Syro-Malabar community celebrated mass in our parish. That looks a little bit different than it does on our typical Sunday mass, right? But still part of the Catholic Church, still in communion. It was basically like, we can maintain, like you said, some of the rituals of the Anglican Church, but now in full communion with Rome. But after a period, after it's approved and after people understand what they're getting into. So I want to make it clear that it's not just Anglicans now
Catholics
who are acting Catholic. Like, there is a formal process where the church has made it simplified for Anglicans to become part of the Catholic Church. And there is a period of formation, like Matt said, and there's a period of catechesis, a period, and then there's a formal, like I said, I picture like a big Easter vigil, people are confirmed into the Catholic Church. So sometimes you see individuals, sometimes you see priests who become Catholic priests after some formation and ordination and all those things. So it's not just we're taking the Anglican Church and slapping Catholic Church on the building.
No.
There's a formal process. So like you said, sometimes there's a desire in the entire community, like it's happened in Canada, I believe twice on a major scale that I know of.
Like whole churches.
The whole parish, the whole Anglican parish entered into full communion with the Catholic Church. And so that's why this apostolic constitution, which we call the personal ordinariate for Anglicans, or people just call it the Anglican ordinariate. And I want to also just explain for people who might not be familiar with the term, like an ordinariate is is sort of equivalent to a diocese. We're familiar with the term diocese.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a province of the church, right? And but an ordinariate is not defined by geography or territory. It's defined sort of where the need arises,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a pastoral need, so it has a little more flexibility, but still has its own ordinary,
Yeah.
has its own bishop today. And picture it like this. Picture it like the military.
Yeah.
So the military in Canada is called the military ordinariate.
Okay.
So in Canada right now, Bishop Scott McCagg is the bishop currently of the military ordinariate. So anywhere on military bases, like here in our city,
Yeah, we have one.
we have a military base. So technically, like not technically, in reality, the chapel on the military base is under the authority of the bishop of the military ordinariate, Bishop McCagg. So the Anglican ordinariate is similar. It doesn't have it doesn't need to have a base. It doesn't need to have a military base. But parishes, just like, in cities, you have the Ukrainian church.
Yeah.
Ukrainian
that
doesn't
falls
follow-
under its
yeah.
own bishop.
That's right, that's what
but
I was
it's
gonna say.
in the city.
Yeah.
Or you have the Chaldean church. It's in the city. Or the Syro-Malabars in our city don't have a church, but they have a community. And when they gather, they're gathering under the authority of their bishop. So in the same way, Anglicans, the Anglican ordinariate is overseen by their own bishop, where the pastoral needs sort of dictate that is needed, right? So it's not, and the important thing is when people come over to be in full communion from the Anglican Church, it is the Constitution from Pope Benedict says that it's very clear that while some of the rituals can be maintained as long as they fall in line with the teachings of the Catholic Church. So yeah, you don't just present them a Roman Missal. You go through the text and say, okay, well, geez, we got to change that a little bit or reword this or whatever it might be, right? The authority in which they profess is under the Catholic Church. And actually, the Constitution says that the Catechism of the Catholic Church is the authoritative expression of the faith that's professed by members of the ordinariate. So I could see how, like, you have a parish of people.
Yeah.
And, think of any parish.
Yeah.
You have, 300 people at Mass or 500 people at Mass. Maybe you got 500 different opinions or whatever it might be, right? So you could see how some people just aren't ready to make that jump.
Yeah.
But in some cases, whole communities have come over.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the precipitating factors that made this a possibility. It's like, okay, well, why in the first place would an entire parish want to separate itself from Anglicanism and align itself with Catholicism? Because again, looking at the history, especially the Anglican Church in North America, there's been a lot of division in recent decades. There have been people turning away from the Anglican Communion and still calling themselves Anglican. There have been Anglican communions who have distinguished themselves from Canterbury, which is historically kind of the center of Anglicanism. So again, you have a lot of divisions kind of precipitating this change, and you have again, colloquially it's called kind of high Anglican and low Anglican. When I lived in Ottawa, I went to an Anglican church. That was my introduction to liturgy because I knew nothing about Catholicism. But I went to a high Anglican church, and that was my first that's where I learned what a collect was, and the parts of the structure of they don't call it the Mass, but the structure of liturgy. Yeah. And there was something appealing about that. And again, in retrospect, it's because it aligns really, really structurally, at least it aligns really, really well with the Mass. So you can see a lot of, you would say, high Anglicans who have an appreciation for liturgy, who are maybe disenfranchised with either kind of progressive Anglicanism or seeing how much change there is in Anglican theology, and just kind of adopting a lot more kind of modernist, kind of progressive approaches. And you're like, okay, Catholicism looks really appealing, not just for the individual, but for these entire communities who kind of see the foundations of their
They feel more closely aligned.
Are kind of crumbling away. They say, okay, well, this is a more authentic expression of the faith we profess.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just happen overnight, but it is an easy process. Communities who come over to the Catholic Church, they apply to the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith, and permission is given. Once permission is granted, which Pope Benedict in 2009, this constitution has simplified the process. Like, they have the faculty to celebrate the Holy Eucharist, the other sacraments, to pray the Liturgy of the Hours, the liturgical celebrations, according to the liturgical books, according to the Anglican tradition, that are approved by the Holy See, right? So that is a process where people are confirmed into the Catholic Church. Now, for clergy, this is very interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
So for clergy, also the process has been simplified as well. So those who ministered as Anglican deacons, priests, or bishop, and fulfill the prerequisites according to canon law. So I know in some Anglican communities, there are female deacons and female priests. So those don't fulfill the requisites established by canon law.
Typically, those would not be the communities that are lining up to
the Catholic Church.
Okay, question though, because I know of 4 priests, I think, that were Anglican and then have switched over, and 3 of them were married.
Yeah.
And so that's one of those few. When I say I know a Catholic priest that's married, it's normally because they've come over from the Anglican Church.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the case of married ministers, they don't have to divorce their wives.
Okay.
Right?
That's right,
So they are able to maintain their marriage vocation and still be ordained.
And that would be like, too, now that I'm saying that out loud, is because the Ukrainian Church has married priests, or the Byzantine Rite can have. So some of those Eastern rites can have married priests, but again, as long as you're married before you're ordained, there's a bunch of rules that have to be followed there as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, because it's like, as long as it's canonically allowed, that it's like non-married priests in the Roman Rite is a discipline. It's an established and maintained discipline of the Church. But again, in the Byzantine Rite, it's not that strictly held. But in the Ordinariate, it's interesting because they're not forced to make a choice, right? So you could say it's like, okay, it's cool that they're able, you don't have to divorce your wife, but you also don't have to leave your parish, because a lot of times these pastors are the ones who are initiating
the change,
this trek back to Rome. So again, I think it's really good that they're actually able to maintain both. It's not just, okay, you're married, so you can't be a priest anymore, or if you want to be a priest, you have to divorce. Both of those seem like you have to deny a major aspect of either vocation that you've made kind of a commitment to. So I think it is really great that, again, that's one of the other things that's reconciled, because it's not a violation of the kind of canonical requirements.
That's right.
Yeah.
But however, on the same note, if someone is not married, let's say an Anglican minister comes over and is not married, then
they take a vow.
They are to adhere to the norms of clerical celibacy. Okay. It's clergy are coming over now. Of course, just like parishioners have to be confirmed into full communion with the Catholic Church, deacons and priests have we ordained. It's not just
they have to be reordained then.
They have to be ordained.
Ordained in the Catholic Church. Yeah.
So
we believe in the one baptism.
Yes.
But communion, reconciliation, all those things that don't take, they're now done for the first time in the Catholic faith, in full communion with the faith. Would they have to get remarried? No, sorry. Would they have to get their marriage blessed then? Is that?
No, because your marriage is valid.
That's what I mean. So okay. So it's your baptism and your marriage would be but they'd have to be confirmed.
Yes, and clergy, they have to go through the process of lector, acolyte, deacon, and they have to go through
the steps of ministries on the way to priesthood, and have some sort of formation. Yeah. Right. So while someone might have an MDiv they've studied that before they became Anglican ministers. Yeah. There is a certain expectation that these studies are taken within the Catholic context.
Yeah, Catholic theology.
Could be
Yeah,
back
makes
to the
sense.
seminary, could be back to some sort of study.
Is there like a speed track that they can go? So they're not doing it for
they don't.
8 months.
Yeah,
8
we,
years.
we recognize the fact that they already have an MDiv.
Yeah.
They've already done theological
But you
studies.
you just take it and twist it to okay. So just making sure that you've got the proper courses, let's say, under your belt.
and the proper Catholic formation.
Yeah.
Like if someone's going to be a Catholic priest, you want to make sure that they have the
Yeah,
right
understanding.
way to lead
Yeah.
a community of people, especially a community of people who might just be coming new into the Catholic Church. You want to make sure that but even outside of the Anglican ordinariate, there are Anglican ministers who have come to become Catholic priests, who have left the Anglican Church. So they're not ministering to former Anglicans. They're ministering in Catholic parishes.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So same thing. The same process is that while we recognize their degrees and their studies from before, that there is an expectation that these studies are done within the Catholic context, that formation of the person who's to be ordained a priest is done in the proper Catholic context to lead a parish of Catholics. Right?
So that's okay. I want to ask a quick question too, but because this is one of the things I remember being on retreat in Net. So I was going across Canada, and we came in and we did a retreat in a high Anglican. I'm going to suggest a high Anglican church is where we were doing this Catholic retreat. They had a tabernacle and they had a light, and not knowing what's going on there, I remember genuflecting towards the tabernacle, going, okay, well, I don't know, and then calling back and asking people that I knew, and they're like, yeah, no, the high Anglicans they're in line with the Catholic Church that way, so we're all the same. It's the same communion. They believe in the true body, but that's not. We were talking about this before. That's not true, right? The only people aligned in the only communion. True Eucharist, I'm going to say, are those people aligned in the Catholic Church. And so those are the Byzantine rites and the Ukrainian Catholics, and then this ordinariate that we're talking about now, where they've fully converted over from that. But so high Anglican, low Anglican, Lutheran, if they have communion, it's not in line with our Catholic Church, correct?
That's right. There's I would say a spectrum of beliefs in the Anglican Church, right? And so what some people would informally call high Anglicans, because I hear people say, well, high Anglicans and Catholics are the same. That's not true.
Yeah.
There may be some practices, visual aspects
They're very similar.
that seem similar, right? So with this spectrum of beliefs, there are certain groups of Anglicans who believe that the communion bread that they celebrate during their service is the real presence of Jesus, right? And so, if that's what they believe, of course, they're going to place it in a tabernacle.
They're going to have a light,
light or whatever it might be, right? So, from our perspective, it's not the real presence of Jesus, right? There's no authority to celebrate those sacraments, to consecrate the Eucharist when the split from the Catholic Church happened at the Reformation, right? And so, while some people might believe, now you go to other Anglican churches and there's
there's nothing.
Box.
There's no pretense.
Nothing.
No. And but that's okay. That's the part that I gotta say, because they were like Catholic priests at the time of King Henry VIII, let's say, were forced into this Anglican church or this Anglican belief. Now, there is, as we talked about, there was some underground, there was some separation, there was some of that. So didn't they have authority at that time to consecrate the Eucharist, and then the king just announces something, so then that authority gets taken away? Like, how does that work?
Well, the authority is given to you through ordination under communion with the Catholic
Holy
Church
See,
and the Holy See, the Bishop of Rome, your bishop. Once that separation happens, like tomorrow, if I decided, like, I'm an ordained Catholic, I'm a legitimately ordained Catholic priest, right? But tomorrow I'm decided to go and celebrate the service at the local Anglican church.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I have the authority there to consecrate under their ritual and under the authority of whatever their leader is.
Yes, because the validity is drawn from a number of things. So even there is a robust debate about whether or not there still exist legitimate Anglican ordinations, because that like at the time of Henry VIII, but those priests' ordinations would be valid, and if they were made a bishop, again, that's kind of the tricky part, because their elevation to a bishop wouldn't necessarily be valid, and they required a bishop to ordain more priests. Anyway, but there is a debate about like whether or not there are still
Because the laying on of hands tradition has
validly
followed.
ordained Anglican.
Yeah.
So even if that is the case,
Yeah.
the legitimacy is validity of ordination, but also the validity of form, that it's a licit practice within the liturgy itself. So again, if all of those conditions aren't met, it's illicit and it's not validly consecrated.
It's like, I'm going to give you an example. I know in Northern Ontario, it was very popular, like maybe 20 years ago now. Like 20 years ago seems like, 10 or whatever it is. But there was, I know someone, this woman who was a former Catholic, there's this group of called Roman Catholic women priests.
Yes.
And
Okay. Yeah.
they claim that they got on a boat somewhere outside of a territory.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Of a
Yeah.
diocese.
Yeah.
And they claim that
They got
a
ordained.
legitimate bishop from Germany or something like that ordained them priests.
Yeah.
Well, that's nice, and I hope they took pictures and had cake after. But the fact
Doesn't
is
make it
that
true.
doesn't make it true, because the form
Yeah.
is not there.
Yes.
Yeah,
like
that makes sense.
The requisites of the priesthood, like the church only has the authority to ordain within the proper context of its rituals.
Yeah.
And when, like for example, in baptism, you can't baptize someone with orange juice.
Yeah.
Right?
You have to do it the right
You
way.
have to use water.
And-
it's
and we
part.
talked about-
It's a requirement for baptism is to use water.
use
For
the right
marriage
words.
in the Catholic Church, it's a requirement for a man and a woman. Just like ordination, it's a requirement for a man.
Yeah.
And so these things are not valid if all the forms are not present.
And even if that were true, if the bishop is outside of the bishop's province,
He has no
authority.
jurisdiction.
it would be an invalid ordination.
I know.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and so then, good. So they've lost, I'm going to say, so in King Henry VIII's time, I mean, it would be very similar to a bishop removing faculties from a priest, right? Would be in a similar way saying, no, you know what, you can no longer do this, and whether if they go outside that and keep practicing, then they're going to, because the bishop has that authority. So if the bishop in the area, the true bishops, the Catholic bishops that are in the area say, no, you can't practice in the Catholic faith at this point. And they keep doing it. It's just
They don't have valid faculties.
exactly.
Yeah.
So okay, that makes sense.
In the time we have left here, I just want to talk about what was the desire of this switch? So the Catholic Church has opened the doors to our Anglican brothers and sisters, and I believe that Pope Benedict actually says in the Constitution that there would be this would be a sign to indicate sort of future reconciliation with other groups, right? That this open door to the Anglican community would be like a sign that, the Catholic Church is working on reconciliation. You can keep some of your rituals and come into full communion with the Catholic Church. So obviously there's a desire for people to come into the Catholic Church. So I'm just wanting to say, if people are listening today and they are part of the Anglican Church or other Protestant churches, this desire to become part of full communion with the Catholic Church, why do you think there was a need? Matt, you mentioned that there's a wide sort of, even amongst the Anglican Church, there's division, and there's from this church on this corner might practice or believe or teach things that are different from the Anglican Church at the other end of the city or whatever it might be, or down the street even. So some people, some Anglicans were becoming sort of disenfranchised with Canterbury or with the Anglican teachings. Do you think that was the root of the search for more and the search for?
Yeah, I'm sure, because you're kind of asking the question what's the end game?
What's the
But
end
you
game?
can ask that question what's the end game for the church, and what's the end game for the people who are drawn to this? And I think the answer is the same for both. That it's unity. So I think if you're on the outside of the church, and again, this was my experience, that you see this splintering that's happening in not just in Protestant denominations, but interdenominationally.
Yeah.
That it's like you have just this. There's not a reunification that's happening within Protestantism, at least in my experience. But again, the end game from inside the church is unity. Pope John the 23rd, the same pope who called Vatican II, on his deathbed. Like he said, like the greatest scandal in the Christian church is the lack of unity. And we said last week when we were talking about orthodoxy, it was like Jesus' final prayer on earth is that the believers be one. That is like that the lack of unity in Christianity is a scandal. So you have the church taking active steps to say that, again, not just sign on to our missal and fall in line. That there really is this olive branch. There really is this like desire to be in communion, to be the body of Christ, but it's on generous and charitable terms. That it's like, let's take what's good from your tradition, and you're able to continue it, but let's do it in a way that takes Jesus seriously, takes the history and tradition of the church, that takes theology seriously, that takes the sacramental life seriously, and maybe kind of in the theme of what we're talking about with Orthodoxy. Like, okay, what does this look like? I think the personal ordinariate of St. Peter gives us a really good template. So high Anglican, liturgically conscious Protestant Christians, this bridge is a little bit shorter than it might be for other Protestant denominations who have, in centuries past, have kind of abandoned any liturgical sensibility. But it's not impossible. So you can say like different versions of Protestantism, like some versions of Methodism, some Presbyterian traditions, or it wouldn't be parishes, but there's enough sensibility, traditional sensibility, and liturgical. There's sufficient orthodoxy that there is cause for hope that this may serve as a template to bring others into unity with Rome.
I think we announce this every week on at Mass, if not every day at Mass, in the Creed, where we believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church.
Yeah.
What they don't realize there is the Catholic there is the small C Catholic. It's not the big C Catholic. We're not talking about we believe in the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. It doesn't say Roman Catholic. It says the Holy Catholic Church, and that Catholic means universal, and that's the idea. That's what I think people are drawn to, is if they're seeking truth, they're seeking to be in, again, like you suggested, communion. If they're seeking truth, they're going to find that, and they're going to find that in the tradition and specifically theology of the Catholic Church. But they can celebrate it in their own traditional way, as long as it lines up here. Yeah. I think the reason that people are attracted to the Catholic Church or are coming back to the Catholic Church from other faiths is the exact same reason that the world hates the Catholic Church, which is it's not changing. It's a non-change. Like for 2,000 years, they have 2,000 years of experience in theology. We're developing some of that, our understanding of what those is, and maybe in some of the disciplines, as we talked about. But there's doctrine and dogma, and those aren't changing, and these are set in stone. And so that's why we will never have the women priests, because this is what it is in doctrine, and this is why popes have come on for it. We will never have this, we will never have that, and because it is laid out in stone for us. And if that makes sense to you, if you're seeking truth and you realize, oh, this makes a lot of sense, this is the reason they believe this, there's a lot of things to back it up, it makes it really easy for some of the Protestant faiths to reconcile with that, because hey, no, there's good theology here, I understand this. And having myself gone into theology of other other Christian denominations, I should say, realizing that there are just some things that they're not allowed to talk about. Like ministers will sign up and get a job, and they'll be like, okay, I can't. They sign a piece of paper saying they're not allowed to talk about the gift of tongues, let's say. They're saying that they're not allowed to talk about this. The Catholic Church doesn't have any of that. The Catholic Church says, no, that we have a very set this is what we believe and this is what we don't believe. And so that's a lot easier for people to swallow sometimes, thinking, okay, I don't know if I agree with everything the Catholic Church teaches, but I believe with most of this stuff, and I'll wrestle with some of the small stuff later.
Yeah. I want to just add here that Catholic, because the Anglican Ordinariate, or the personal ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter, as it's called in Canada, is in full communion with the Catholic Church. Yeah. So Catholics can attend and participate in the Mass there. For example, I was at a wedding of one of my friends at the Anglican Ordinariate, right? So it's in full communion with the Catholic Church. Yeah. My goddaughter was baptized in the Anglican ordinariate, which is in full communion with the Catholic Church, right? So different ritual, but so all these things happen. We can participate. We can attend Mass. We can receive the Eucharist. But in Canada right now, there are only 5 communities that are part of the Anglican ordinariate. They're in Victoria, BC, Edmonton, Calgary, Alberta, Ottawa, and Toronto. There's 5 communities there. So if people are traveling and you run into an Anglican ordinariate that's in full communion with the Catholic Church, feel free to go. However, I want to make clear that Catholics are not to, while we may attend for certain reasons, Anglican churches
Are off limits.
or other Protestant churches for weddings or funerals or whatever it might be, that does not fulfill our Sunday obligation on Sunday when we attend an Anglican service or another Protestant service. And when we are present at, for one reason or another, we are not to participate in their communion bread or whatever they present at the time of communion. We are not to participate in that. And that is because when we participate in something like that, we're sort of giving our assent to what is happening there is true. Whereas we believe that the Eucharist is much more than just sharing bread. It's the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. So we're kind of going against our own conscience. When we say amen on Sunday morning at Catholic Mass, we're saying we believe that this is truly the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. And then when we stand up at a Protestant church and receive their communion bread, we're going against our conscience by receiving that because we know that the Eucharist is way much more. So I want to make the distinction. If you're going to a Protestant church, an Anglican church, another Protestant church, you are not to participate in the communion bread. However, if you find yourself at a personal ordinariate, Anglican ordinariate, that is in full communion with the Catholic Church, you are able to attend and receive the Eucharist.
Because they're Catholic.
They're Catholic.
Yeah.
It's a different. It's like if you're
Use the same
traveling,
name,
you
but
go to a
different.
Byzantine Mass
Exactly.
or a Chaldean Mass or the Mass in Malayalam, the Syro-Malabar Rite or whatever it is, right? So it's the same thing.
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay, so that's all the time we have today. But I really think there's truly, I know personally people who have become Catholic through Pope Benedict's invitation to become in full communion with the Catholic Church. So I think this was a really beautiful thing, a really beautiful olive branch. And maybe if someone is out there and you have friends who are considering becoming in full communion with the Catholic Church, or this might be something helpful for them if they're part of the Anglican tradition, that the Church is making these avenues available for people to come into full communion. And what a beautiful, beautiful gesture of welcome to become really a member of Christ's Church, which I think is just a beautiful thing. So if anyone has, maybe someone listening has had the experience of becoming Catholic from the Anglican tradition or another Protestant tradition that you want to share your story with us, you can send us an email at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com, or you can share this episode with others as well who you might think might be interested in hearing it. That's all the time we have today. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.